Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are out there listening across the world. Welcome to Vestiges After Dark. I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this April 27th, 2021. Tonight, we are talking a little bit about Gnosticism and also going to open lines, taking your questions, your comments, listening to your paranormal stories. We want you to call in. And here's your opportunity to talk to us, to ask us a question, and to get a more complete, proper answer. The number to call tonight is 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. You can call now and go into the queue. We won't be taking calls until a little bit later in the show, but the sooner you call in, the sooner better your chances are being put first in the queue. And we also have a few announcements here. I'm going to get started in just a moment. Don't go away. It's a great show. Well, welcome everyone to this edition of Vestiges After Dark. I hope everyone is having a wonderful evening or morning. I mean, you guys are listening from everywhere, anywhere out there, and so it could be any time of day for you. I know that we have a lot of listeners in other countries, so we want to welcome you and thank you for listening and being a part of this broadcast and making this show more interesting by expanding its audience, and hopefully it's caller-based, because this show is really focused around open lines. I try to make that the foundation, even when we have guests. I think it's a great way of being able to interact with all of the people out there that follow us on the various platforms of social media. And, you guys are always asking questions, and I can't answer a lot of them because they're great questions, and Twitter is a terrible platform for answering questions. Facebook's a little bit better, but I don't really use that much. And you can come over to the Nicolayan network, but a lot of you don't want to do that for some reason. And I don't know why, because it's a great network. It's completely free, and you're not going to have a lot of the problems you have on the other platforms. So there's really no excuse. other than being stubborn. So don't be stubborn. Come on over and join us over at the Nicolean Network. You can connect with that. Just go to our website, esotericcatholic.org. And there is a link on the top menu there where it says join our social media network. And you can just go over there and sign up and join us. You know, I think everybody that is a part of that network is very happy with it. They have nothing but good things to say, and that's a wonderful thing. If you're just new to this show, or if you're new to me, you know, you're wondering what this is all about, who I am, you know, you can find everything there is to know about everything that matters on esotericcatholic.org. That is the church's website. I am the presiding bishop of that church. And you can also follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. That's at Exorcist Bishop on Twitter. Follow me there. And also follow us on YouTube, the Nicolean channel on YouTube. Great place for you to get access to all of our events. Everything that we do, from the masses of the church, special liturgies, as well as this show, Vestiges After Dark, and its sister show, Vestiges of Christianity. That's the one that started it all. Including also the liturgical libations, which we haven't done in a while, and that's something we might be looking at very soon. So everything will be airing right there on YouTube. So at the very least, follow the YouTube channel. It helps us, actually. The more people that follow us there, the more opportunity we have to be able to create even bigger and better productions, hopefully somewhere down the road. So yeah, do it. Help us out. Also, we're going to try a little experiment tonight. Actually, we're going to try two experiments tonight. One is a thought experiment, and one is actually more of a production experiment. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if it's going to be a complete disaster. So bear with me. But tonight is an open show for the most part, and tonight's a good night to practice something that might be a disaster. So what we're going to try here is, I know because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, that there's so many of you who listen in other countries. And we have a strong following in places like the UK, Australia is a big one. Even Japan, I understand. But the Netherlands, Germany, it's Denmark. I know we've got quite a bit of following in Denmark. It's great. I mean, we're really getting out there. But a lot of you would want to call in, and of course, because of the tolls of calling international, it can be prohibitively expensive, and there's no free number for this show, unfortunately. Maybe someday. But again, if you support the show, if you support the church, if you at the very least subscribe to the channel, it will help us to maybe get to the point where we can expand to doing those kinds of things. And Blog Talk Radio is not going to be a great help there. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to link the church's Skype account into the switchboard. All right. Right now, it's connected. So I don't know, because Skype gives you virtually no control over what goes on with Skype. I don't know if it's going to be this blaring, jarring sound that someone's calling in, and I don't want the sound of the Skype ring coming over the broadcast. Now, it might not happen on the actual feed that goes out to the podcast on Blog Talk Radio, which of course goes out to Spreaker, and then of course iHeartRadio and iTunes and all the other platforms. But it probably will come across on YouTube, because that's a different sound feed. That's a direct feed into my system. Okay, so if there's a sound that comes in over the system, you're going to probably hear it on YouTube. That's the unfortunate part, because YouTube has the best sound. That's why YouTube has the best sound, because it's a direct feed. It's not going through the Blog Talk Radio system, where I do have a little bit more control over what Blog Talk hears and what it doesn't hear. So I don't know if it's going to work, but for those of you who are international and would like to call into the show, we're going to give this a shot tonight. If it becomes a disaster, if it becomes disruptive, we're probably going to just cancel it out. But tonight, here's your chance. It might be your only chance. If you want to call into Vestiges After Dark tonight, you can call the Skype. So you can do Skype to Skype. That should be free for you, okay? So what you do is you log into your Skype account and call at Eye of the Seer. That's all one word, Eye of the Seer, EYE OFSEER. Okay, and you call that, and that will connect you to the Skype, and hopefully you just wait there. You'll probably be able to hear the show. At least you should be able to hear the show when you call in. And we'll take your call at some point a little bit later into the broadcast after I've had a chance to set the stage with our topic tonight. I always like to start. I don't want to just do plain old open lines. We don't get enough callers yet to really do an entire show of open lines. So I like to set it with at least some kind of topic, even if it's just a quick survey of something. And tonight we're going to be discussing a little bit of Gnosticism, actually, and how it applies to some of the things that are going to be related to the thought experiment I would like to also do tonight. So for those of you listening, whether you're doing it live right now or listening on demand later when this broadcast is sent out to the various podcast channels, it will not matter. What we're going to do is a thought experiment that will hopefully definitively put an end to some of the craziness in the world right now, because I know that all of you are probably fed up with COVID-19. I can't imagine anybody disagreeing with that, who wants to be living under the effects of this pandemic. And regardless of where your specific thoughts are on the pandemic, does not really matter, does not matter to me at all. What does matter, though, is that we get beyond this and return to normal. Now, some people really don't want normal, which is really kind of horrific when you think about it. Some people actually want to maintain some of these ideas that have started, like wearing masks all the time, regardless. I've talked to people that actually intend to continue to do that, and that's fine if you want to do that. But the rest of us probably don't want to do that, and I'd like to see a world where we don't have to do that anymore. And so I would like us to create a thought experiment. Art Bell did this years ago. It was frighteningly accurate and effective. I would like for all of us, now I don't have obviously the entire listener base of Coast to Coast AM, but we do have a lot of people that listen to this show. It's in the hundreds to the thousands. And so, there's a lot of people that could put their energy into this. And so what I want to do is I want to just very neutrally put out there that we're all going to, at the same time every day, focus on the one intention that the world returns to normal, that we that everything that the pandemic started goes away, including the pandemic itself. That COVID-19 is rendered a neutral effect, or little more than just a seasonal virus that comes around and nobody worries about. I'd like to get to a point where we are a world like that again, and so I'd like to do this starting tomorrow, because it won't work. It probably won't work at this time. We have to pick a time, and I think the best time to probably do this is going to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, so that's going to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. Okay, now if you can't, for whatever reason, do that, let's say 3 o'clock Eastern is like you're doing something at that time every day. What I would like for you to do then is just do it as soon as you can, the same day. But if you can do it at 3 p.m. Eastern time every day until the next show, okay, we're going to do this for 7 days. It's kind of like a little novena, only without the prayer part. This is more of an intention part. This is more of a metaphysical experiment than it is a religious one. And I want it to be accessible to everybody, not just people that are faith-based, So I'd like you to, at 3 p.m. Eastern time, every day until the next show, which is a week from tonight. Okay, so till next Tuesday at 8 p.m. So every day at 3 p.m. Eastern time, focus your attention on the end of this pandemic, including all of its consequences. Okay? At least the negative ones. More hand washing, that's a good thing. So hopefully that stays. Although I have to say I'm not even seeing that anymore. It seems like people are more concerned with wearing masks and social distancing than washing hands, which is really unfortunate, because washing hands would be one of the good things that came out of this. But people are lazy, so I don't know. But, hopefully that's the only thing that sticks around from COVID-19, and I'd like that to be the intention. Okay? So this is what I want all of us to do this, okay? And it doesn't matter how you do it. I'm not going to even tell you what you need to think about or how you need to visualize this. You just simply put the intention out there that the pandemic will end. Not please make it end. You're not requesting this. You're demanding this. And I'm going to talk about cosmic ultimatums because I actually did a little bit of that on YouTube, not YouTube, Twitter earlier this week, and I think some people might have been confused by that post, and that's kind of what inspired tonight's show. Okay, so we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. But that's the thought experiment. So I want you guys to do that 7 days, every day at 3 p.m. Eastern Time if you can. So figure out what Eastern Time is for you. And if you can't do it at that time, that's okay. It's better if you do it at that time because then we would all be putting our energy in together. I actually just set my alarm on my phone at 3 p.m. to remind me to do it. And you don't have to do it long, 60 seconds, maybe a couple minutes if you want. Just focus, okay? Close your mind, quiet your mind, and focus on putting the intention out there. The pandemic will end and all of its consequences, okay? That's what we're doing. And let's make this happen, okay? Because we actually do have that power. The problem is, the reason why things don't tend to happen this effectively is because we're such divided people. You know, we're always in a constant state of division. And that's no good for metaphysical exercise. That's why religion's important. The very word religion comes from the word religio, or religio, I believe, is how it's pronounced. I could be wrong on that. Which means to bind together. And that binding is about bringing people together, not to control them, but to unify them as a whole under the body, of the church. That was the original purpose. That's why we use that word religion. And so this is a way of bringing us together with a common intention that can benefit us all. Because, again, I don't care where you stand politically on this. I don't care if you love masks or you hate them. It does not matter. What does matter is that people are being adversely affected by this. Okay, people have died from this. People have lost family members to this. People have had their lives destroyed by this. People have committed suicide because of the depression that this has caused. People have lost jobs, have lost financial security. The detrimental effects have been countless, and not to mention the political environment has become so hostile and toxic. Nothing good has come out of this except the hand washing. Really, honestly, hand washing is the only good thing. It's the one thing that we're losing, unfortunately. But this is a way that we can come together, regardless of your particular view on it, and let's do something good as members of the family of God. And I'm talking about in the universal sense, not just in the Christian sense. Okay. So I think you guys, that's your assignment. And we'll talk about it next week. I mean, I don't expect that there's going to be this dramatic effect, but we can definitely have an immediate impact if we really do this and we get enough numbers behind it. So again, if you're listening live, you know what to do. If you're listening on demand after this has aired, it still applies. Do it, okay? Every day for the next 7 days at 3 p.m. Eastern Time if you can. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with tonight's show. Hello, Sister Mary Joan. How are you tonight?
Hey, good evening, everyone. Good to be here. So we all have our homework assignments.
Yes, we do, and I'm part of it. I've given myself the same assignment, so we're all doing it together. We're all on equal ground with this, and it should be a pretty interesting, hopefully an interesting result. Like I said, yeah. Art Bell had millions that were able to contribute to this. I only have thousands, but if or hundreds, I don't know, because you can't count on every listener doing it. But hopefully we have enough.
Well, millions might be dangerous because didn't Art Bell make it flood in the Midwest?
Yeah, it was a drought experiment, as I recall. It was they were having drought out there, and it was very severe, very bad. And he had all his listeners do a thought experiment just like this to let it rain out there. And it was so immediately effective. They had a deluge, and it like killed a whole bunch of people. And after that, he said he'd never do another one of these thought experiments again, because he felt responsible for what happened. Now, I don't think this is as dangerous as that, because we're not trying to affect the weather, and we're not trying to,
not even remotely.
No, we're really talking about the societal effects. I want to see people smiling again. I want to see people going into places of business and being kind and courteous again instead of always in a piss poor mood. I want to see, people behaving like human beings again, although not that we were ever that great, but we were a lot better than we are now. I think the world has definitely taken a negative turn, and let's kind of reverse course a bit in that respect. And I think it's just the psychological effects that this has put people under over the last year,
Yeah, everybody's been affected psychologically from this, whether you've had it or not.
Yeah, no question about it. And that's something that I'd like to, hopefully we can all work together. Again, it shouldn't be political. It should be your own views should have no bearing on this. Everyone should agree that this needs to end, and going back to some conventional sense of normalcy would be much more beneficial than continuing on this dark path where there's just no direction. I mean, it's basically just, it started with 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and they never ended it. I mean, there's always something, some caveat, and I'm sick of it. And I booked a trip to Las Vegas. Sister, we do our annual trip to Las Vegas every New Year's, and last New Year's I didn't go. I couldn't go. It was all locked down. We're pretty much just I mean, it wasn't going to be it was locked down. So this year I'd like to go, and so I booked everything to like as if it's normal, and I put out there an ultimatum to the universe, cosmically, and it started with the post about the bourbon. If you're following my Twitter, you saw that I posted a picture of a very rare bottle of Elijah Craig 23-year-old bourbon, very hard to get. When I purchased it, it was something like $260, $270, something like that. Now it is selling for anywhere from $850 to well over $1,000. I've even saw one store selling it for $1,800.
Wow.
Yeah, $1,800. It's a collector's bottle. Okay, so a lot of times people don't even open those bottles. They just hold them and then resell them at much higher values. And so I said, and we had that little private conversation, you and I, and with Sister Maximilian a few weeks ago, and I said, this pandemic and the travel restrictions and the masks on planes and Delta, putting these permabands on people because they don't want to wear them, and I'm so over it all. I'm so tired of dealing with it. I want this to end, and I said, the day that it ends, we're going to crack open that bottle and celebrate. But if it doesn't, I'm smashing that son of a bitch all over the floor. And I said it just like that, if I recall correctly. And I mean it. I actually mean that. People think I might be exaggerating or joking. No, I fully intend to do that. And somebody came on. What's that?
We know you mean it.
Oh yeah, well you know, but I mean I'm not sure everybody on Twitter knows.
Don't be surprised if I don't show up with a sponge.
Well, Heathcliff walks on that floor after he does his litter box thing, so you might not want to drink it.
I'll filter it. It's Elijah 23 year.
There you go. Well, I people probably were wondering what that was all about, and so I said, I gave him. Somebody came on and said, think about the artisans that spent all this time creating that craft, 23 years it took to make it, and kind of implying that it would be of great disrespect to those whiskey makers if I smashed it, because I'm having an irrational moment over my frustrations with society. But I don't think they fully understand that there was definitely method to this madness. There's virtually nothing I do that is purely illogical. Even my illogical behavior always has a logical foundation to it. It's just not always something I talk about, or it's not always immediately apparent, but it's there. I can assure you of that. I do everything with extreme intention. So nothing's accidental unless I'm really just fatigued and I'm making mistakes. That happens. But outside of like the actual things that I plan on doing, no, there's always intent behind those things. There's very, very specific intent behind those things. And so I was explaining to them that what the purpose of this was that I am making an ultimatum with the universe that either it gets its act together and puts society right again, or at least gets us closer to back to normal, or I will smash the whiskey. And people are probably thinking, well, why would the universe even care if you smash the whiskey? And it doesn't care that I smash the whiskey. It doesn't. What it does care about, though, is that I am always counted upon as part of my intrinsic beingness. And we all have intrinsic beingness, whether we're aware of it or not. Some of us are more aware than others, but all of us have a function. And that function can be definitely an individual purpose if you allow it to become part of your spiritual dynamic and the makeup of your direction of your life. It can give you purpose in that sense, which is very fulfilling in many ways. But at the same time, it's also, it's still function. Cosmically speaking, it's just function, and we all have a function. And so my function has always been to maintain the tightrope of balance. It's why I always do what I do, and why, people probably have a very difficult time trying to figure out where I stand politically, because in some ways I talk like a very right-wing, conservative, and sometimes I'm talking like a leftist, and they can't figure me out. And they don't understand this, because typically speaking, in their conception of the world, it's always going to have to be one or the other. It can never be moderation. It can never be balance. And even moderation is always about compromise. You're always leaning towards one side. I mean, there are times where I think all of us, even including myself, will gravitate towards one or the other. But for me, it's very issue specific. It's very situation specific. So there are times where if the world is behaving too conservatively, I will tend to I will lean a little more liberal to sort of balance it back out. And if it's leaning too liberal, then I will tend to lean a little more conservative to balance it back out. But it's being able to walk that tightrope, which is something that most people are not very good at doing, and there's very few people that do it. And I'm one of those. When I violate that, which would mean rational behavior, always acting logically, responsibly, and obviously smashing a bottle of 23-year-old bourbon is not a responsible or logical decision to make as a reaction to the frustrations that are stemming from this pandemic effect. So the universe will not notice that I'm pissed off. The universe will not notice that I'm angry. The universe will not notice that I feel that that we've all had a year stolen from us, and so many moments, and I mean, I can't even. I mean, there would have been at least, my goodness, 6 countries that we would have visited that we've never actually. Well, 6 countries that we would have visited for the first time together as a family, the 3 of us, sister Maximilian and my son Levi, that we weren't able to go to, because they were all planned for the past year and a half, and they were all those trips were canceled. So I can't get those times back. I can't get those trips back. And like I said, there's a lot more severe effects than that. That's just a very minor thing compared to what some people have suffered through with this. So, the universe doesn't care that I feel that way. The universe doesn't care that we're in pain and suffering. That the cosmos does not have a reaction to that. But what it does is, when something that it counts on as being intrinsic to its nature to maintain the balance all of a sudden stops doing that, that gets its attention. And so it's something as simple as sacrificing a bottle of 23-year-old bourbon really gets its attention because it's meaningful to me. It's not meaningful to the universe, but it knows that that would be a very extreme act for me to do. And that's not within my nature to do something like that, to commit an extreme act like that, which is ultimately harmless. I'm not hurting anybody by smashing the bourbon. But the fact of the matter is, it's still an extreme act. It is a violation of the artisanal work that went into this. And it's unlike me. It's unbecoming of me, as far as the cosmos is concerned, to behave that way. This gets its attention. This is how we control the various effects of the world. You might say, well, how does that even happen? Because, people are also, particularly conventional Christians, are under the impression that God controls everything. And there's no mistakes, and there's no accidents. Everything happens for a reason, and God's in control of it all. that's one of the biggest misconceptions of the Christian religion because Christianity typically teaches this now. Pastors teach this to their flock. It's not accurate. It's not accurate. And I know I'm going to piss a lot of people off by saying that, but it's fact of the matter is it's not. I'm going to explain how it works. Okay, we're going to have to step outside of the box, though. And that's what tonight's show's about here before we, start going to open lines, which we will do. Don't worry. And if I see that there are some callers there, so be sure to, don't hang up. Okay, we will take calls, particularly probably for the entire second half of the show. But I did want to start this with this topic and explain how this works, because it's also part of the thought experiment that we're going to do too. I'm going to link it all back, so don't worry if I'm going off on some weird esoteric tangent. Don't worry. It's all about educating you tonight. I want to make this a little more of an educational program or episode tonight. Okay, so let's talk about how this works. Okay, so there was this Christian heresy, hundreds and more than 1800 years ago. Okay, more than that even. It really started before that, but as far as the church is concerned, it's about 1800 years ago. There is a philosophy that came out of the Hellenized Jews of Alexandria called Gnosticism. Now, this was a big thing a little over a decade ago. You couldn't turn on Discovery Networks without them doing some show on the Gnostic scriptures. Or talking about the Nag Hammadi. The Nag Hammadi texts are the texts that were discovered and that were all part of a canon of Gnostic scriptures that were not obviously canonical from a biblical standpoint. They were not included in the Bible, but they were extra canonical sources. Much later texts, except for perhaps the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Thomas, which is kind of a secondary thing. It's its own animal, and it's not necessarily Gnostic, and more than we have time to get into tonight. But the Nag Hammadi contains basically this entire collection. It's its own Bible, you might say, of primarily Gnostic texts. Okay, and so Gnosticism was a Jewish, believe it or not, a Jewish philosophical take. That was, again, very Hellenized in the sense that it followed more of a fusion between paganism and Judaism, which, if you can imagine what that would be like, if you had a pagan mother and a Jewish father, what kind of child would that create? Well, Gnosticism is the child that created. And Gnosticism eventually made its way into Christianity, even influenced Christianity. They'd say, oh, well, we got rid of it. It was a heresy. No, we really didn't. We really, really didn't. No. Because even in the writings of St. Paul, which you're talking 50 AD now, okay, around 50, 55 AD, he wrote his epistles. You can hear... in the Colossians and a few other places, you can hear very Gnostic tones. Even the idea and descriptions of the Holy Trinity are very Gnostic in its implications, this idea of emanations from God. But one of the fundamental things, and we would be here all night. I could do a 3-hour show and never even come close to scratching the surface on Gnosticism. So there's no way I can get into all of the details of what Gnosticism is, what it taught, how it applies to Christianity, why it's considered a heresy. I wouldn't have time to get into all that. But what I can tell you is the foundation. Okay, and what the foundation is that ultimately Gnostics were trying to figure out why the world sucked. I mean, you want to make it in simple terms? I can make it as simple as possible. They looked at the world. They said, this sucks. Why does it suck? Because if we have a loving God, it shouldn't suck. That was basically the ultimate question in very vernacular terms, very modern terms. What were they trying to figure out? Then ultimately, we would say, in perhaps more polite terms, the problem of evil. As Christians, we call that in theology the problem of evil. The idea that we have a benevolent, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God, and yet with all this power, we're still under the duress of evil. And that kind of thing something that the Gnostics found unpalatable, because the Christian, let's say at the time, proto-Orthodox is what it would have been referred to as. The proto-Orthodox position on this is that the reason that evil exists is because we haven't caught up to the grace that of the cross. And so the idea here is that we fell, and then we brought corruption into the world, and now we still have to participate in correcting and fixing it. Even though Christ comes, the Messiah comes to give us the tools to do that, we are still ultimately responsible for the effects that it caused. So therefore, even if one is saved, one would still die. Okay, you're not saved from death. You're not going to even though death is conquered, it's the effects of death that's conquered, the permanence of death that's conquered. It's not death itself. You still have to conquer it. You still have to face it. And that's the consequence, the cause and effect relationship of sin to the corruption of the universe that was once perfect and no longer is, because of what the church and Judeo-Christian theology refer to as original sin. Okay, so that's one side of it. So the Gnostics had a different view. They said, no, that can't be right. That can't be right. A benevolent God would have still taken care of this. And what they wanted to try to understand is there had to be some other reason for it. So they started looking at the Old Testament and then comparing it, particularly once it got into Christian, when the Christian world started, and that would have been, again, starting up around the 40s and 50s AD. Then Gnostics that were still around were looking at what Christianity had to say. And then it became a bit of a fusion. That became, originally, Gnosticism was from a group, original sect, or more purist sect called Sethians. But when Christians got involved in Gnosticism, and remember, this was before the biblical canon, this was before the Vatican, this was before there was a standardized Christianity where people were just, happy to believe in the message of Christ, but they had their own way of doing it. So Gnosticism wasn't considered necessarily a heresy at this point. The Gnostics, who were still very much around, the Sethians, were developing Christian ideas of their Gnostic concepts. And that became Valentinian Gnosticism. Now, again, I'm going probably too far advanced from this discussion, but what I really wanted to point out here is that what Gnosticism ultimately comes down to is the idea that the reason that the world is messed up, because these Gnostics were looking at the Old Testament saying, you know what? The God in the Old Testament, he's wrathful, he's emotional, he's out of control sometimes, he's kind of genocidal, and yet the Father that Jesus Christ is telling us to worship is loving and forgiving and understanding. Nothing like what we're seeing in the Old Testament. So this Old Testament Yahweh has to be an imposter. Because that's not the God that Jesus is talking about. Can't be. That's how Gnostics would justify it. Of course, they're having to exclude a lot of Judeo-Christian theology to make this leap, and they did. And that's the problem with it, and that's why the church to this day still considers it heresy. But yet there is still some important parts of it that we cannot discount, because again, it influenced modern Christianity even to this day, and at the same time it does give us a look into the mind of the ancient Christian, and that's very important, because there are things that they taught that were lost because the church rejected all of it as a blanket rejection, instead of saying, well, that's not right, but this stuff, actually there's value here, let's use this is good. And so where that was what really bothered, I think, the proto-Orthodox Christians that became canonical Christianity and conventional Christianity as we understand it today. What became good orthodoxy, you might say, was the idea that this was not the God that created everything, was not the real God. And so they were saying that this God that created everything was what was referred to by Plato and some Platonic philosophy as the demiurge, and Gnostics kind of adopted that, and then they developed their own names for the demiurge. One of the big ones was Yaldabaoth is one of them, and of course these became over the centuries demonized to the point that now, Yaldabaoth and the Abraxas is another not quite the same thing, but also can be referred to as the demiurge. These were eventually become demons in Catholic understanding, because again, anything that's a threat to you, demonize it, and that's fine. We see that today. I mean, how many people refer to Donald Trump as the Antichrist because they can't stand him? I mean, he's not the Antichrist. Politicians, regardless, are not great people. They're never good people. But I mean, to refer to someone as like the actual Antichrist is demonizing them because you hate them. This is no different. People haven't changed in 2,000 years. It's the same behavior, and this is what they were doing back then. So, when you didn't like something from what you saw as a heretic, you demonize it. So that means Abraxas is now a demon. The demiurge must have been a demon, deceiving us, because obviously that's the Gnostic vision was wrong. That's how they look at it, but it wasn't wrong. This is where the big conflict is. And I'm not saying I'm a Gnostic. I'm not a Gnostic. The Nicolean Church is not a Gnostic church. It has it had Gnostic origins and affiliations. There were some Gnostics that helped to develop it, but that was not the direction it went. It's a conventional, esoteric, old Catholic church now, and it always has been. But we don't do blanket statements and say, "Oh, this is all bad because one thing was wrong with it." Yeah, the idea that there's this fake God is, I can see how that would be a problem, because that even kind of stands in the face of monotheism. And as Christians, we are monotheists. There's only one God. There can't be another one. There can't be even a fake one. So who is this demiurge? Who's Abraxas? Who's Yeldabaoth? Who is this? And here's the answer. Okay. Gnosticism was basically Jungian psychology before Carl Jung was ever conceived by the universe. Okay, the archetypes have been in existence for far longer than we can even possibly imagine. All right, we're going back to a time where before we even had written language or wrote anything down or had the ability to communicate intelligently and intellectually with each other. We're talking about archetypal patterns that have pre-existed us, now built into our DNA. Okay, and the same system for dealing with them existed all the way back then. Today we call it analytical psychology or psychoanalysis, which was kind of originating in Freud and then carried on and much more developed in Jung. And I would say Jung did a far better job than Freud ever did on his best day. Freud was a little nutty. Actually, he was a lot nutty.
A little?
Yeah, no, he was a lot. Yeah. Jung was a very, very intelligent, rational man. And he took it in the direction it needed to go. It kind of pissed Freud off, but that's what happens, when somebody takes your work and does a better job with it. But anyway, that's the Jungian psychology that we now look at and say, oh, this is a psychological system. This is part of the field of psychology. This is good. Back in the ancient world, it was Gnosticism. And see, Gnosticism was a system for developing how does one transcend the corruptions of the world. And because it wasn't sufficient in their minds to just simply say that there was just, grace that would be granted to those who pray for it, and then, God takes care of everything, which, again, as you know, that's never been part of my position either. It's not even really the part of the Catholic Church. That's where the faith and works relationship comes in. And we, as Nicolean Catholics, add a third one. We add epignosis, meaning the specific knowledge that is required in order to attain to a state of salvation. That is necessary. And so Gnostics kind of eliminated the grace part altogether. They largely even eliminated the works part. They just focused on gnosis. They're basically saying in order to be saved, one has to become aware. One has to become self-aware. One has to become self-actualized, to use a Maslow term. And in Jung's terms, it would have been individuation, the individuation process. That is the idea of becoming a developed man, or in esoteric terms, homo completenda, as it's been known in the Rosicrucians and some other esoteric sects. Mm-hmm. Fact is, Christianity just sort of simplifies it and makes it, okay, well, you're saved. Jesus saved you. He died on the cross. And it's so much more involved than that. And ultimately, you don't really need a whole lot of intellectual understanding of these things in order to attain to salvation. This much is true. So the Catholic Church is right. At the same time, though, there is a certain personal responsibility that comes with the development of oneself, and to become an individual that is a force to reckon with within nature. And that is also part of salvation, because that's where Orthodoxy takes it into what they call theosis, this divinization of man. And that is a necessary component to also kind of like what comes after salvation, you might say. In Catholicism, it's like, oh, you're saved, that's it. It's like, it's all, I guess, pina coladas and sitting naked on the beach for all eternity after that. It's like this paradise utopian kind of heaven, instead of seeing that heaven is really actually more about taking on the responsibilities of the kingdom, ruling with Christ. And what does that mean to rule with Christ in a perfect universe? What would you have to rule over if everything's perfect? Well, that's the work. That's ruling over oneself. And so Jung saw the bridging that's between spirituality and psychology and put it together into one cohesive system, and that became the archetypal system that he then developed as psychoanalysis, or developed from Freud's psychoanalysis, and became analytical psychology as we now know it. And the process of individuation was central to that. Gnosticism is basically just an ancient form, without all of the benefit of modern psychology, of individuation. And the idea was that the demiurge, this fake god, was the one that was controlling us, keeping us enslaved, and that he created this world of pain, suffering, and illusion, and that Jesus was coming from a much higher God, a transcendent God, a God above this God, and that he was here to make us transcendent. That salvation was not being not so much just being saved from death. It was this being saved from death, but now being able to transcend the limitations of this illusory world, this world of illusion. It's really kind of a bridge between Eastern and Western philosophies and a religious system, and it's a beautiful thing. Fact of the matter is, the demiurge is not what the Gnostics actually saw as a literal god, but we've kind of created it into one. And the fact of the matter is, now it does in fact exist as an egregore, probably the most powerful and most grandiose egregore ever created by human consciousness, because it's had thousands of years to develop and become something, that it now does in fact exist. And so if you're ever wondering why so much of your life seems like it is ordered according to a pattern, but yet it doesn't really necessarily go well. Sometimes you seem programmed, your life seems programmed towards negativity and disaster. And you're like, why would God do this to me? And it's like, and the conventional answer is, oh, we can't understand the mysteries of God. In God's wisdom, it's like, yeah, it's a nice bullshit answer, but it doesn't actually help anyone. It's not really helpful to come up with this idea that, God is, ultimately responsible for your misery, but yet you're too stupid to understand why he's putting you through this. That's not a good way to approach this. It's much better to understand metaphysically what's going on. God is calling us to a state of transcendence, which means that everything that happens in this universe is of very little consequence to him. The only thing that is of consequence is your development, which would be ultimately union with him, or as Jung would have called individuation, as the Gnostics would have seen as perfect gnosis into the pleroma, and what Christians call salvation, what Buddhists call nirvana, what Hindus would call moksha. All of this is ultimately this transcendent state, union with God. Orthodoxy calls it theosis, okay? We become unified into the beatific vision, to use very Catholic terms. All of it is the same thing. I know a lot of people are going to say, no, Bishop, you're blending too much. No. It's reality, okay? I know, and the reason you're going, that part of you is going to have a challenge with this. Your ego's going to fight you a little bit on this, and the reason for that's the demiurge, because see, your ego was created by it. Your ego is not created by God. That's where people get everything wrong. And when we talk about things like reincarnation, and you hear me talk about it seems like you talk about like reincarnation exists, but at the same time you say like when we die we dissipate unless we're saved, and then that's the only, which one is it? And it's because people don't really understand what reincarnation is. They don't understand what the self is. You can't understand reincarnation without understanding what the self is. The self is completely a construct of your ego. Your ego was created by something that doesn't even really exist. It was created by an egregore. That's where the Gnostics were trying to say that everything, all the phenomenal universe, including your own identity, was actually being ruled by this ignorant God. Some even said evil, but he wasn't evil. Not in the truest, purest Gnosticism. The demiurge was just seen as ignorant and deficient. He thinks he's the real God, but he's really not. And why does he think he's the real God? Because our egos made him that. We created a God out of him. So yes, the atheists are correct when they say, oh, you know what? You created God. Man's need and fear of death created God. Yeah, we did. But that doesn't mean that there's not a higher God that we're really, the Christians actually after. That is the Father of Jesus Christ. That is the first person of the Holy Trinity. That's completely transcendent. So transcendent that this does not matter. So when you're praying to him about, COVID-19, okay, yeah, he wants to help you, but if it doesn't help your salvation, you're not going to get an answer to that prayer. Every prayer that God grants you has to be applicable to your salvation. If it breaks beyond that, the actual God, the real God, the God that you really do worship, Jesus is God, all right? Jesus as God, Jesus as speaking to his Father, that God, the Holy Trinity. If it's not applying to your salvation, he doesn't answer it. That's why so many prayers go unanswered, because they're not relevant to the salvation. You might say, but my daughter was dying. This horrible thing happened. I need his help. I'm drowning in debt. I'm financially falling apart. I need his help. And you pray and you pray and you pray and you seem like you get nowhere. The reason for that is you're not approaching it from the point of salvation. So the prayers go unanswered. It's not because God's trying to be tough with you. He's not trying to be hard on you. It's because you have to become transcendent in order to interact with that reality. Otherwise, guess what happens? The artificial one takes place and gets in the way and interferes with it. We're not talking about Satan here. We're talking about the actual rulers of this world. And the Gnostics called them archons. And they really do exist. And the reason why things like astrology work is because those things are ruled by archons. So when you look at fate, okay, you do your natal chart and you see, I've got one of the worst natal charts you'll ever see. I've got a Grand Cross. And if you know anything about astrology, a Grand Cross is like the most miserable thing that you could ever have to deal with. Makes you a very interesting person, by the way, but at the same time, it makes your life very conflicting and likely debilitating, which it has been for me at various points until I began learning how to transcend it. But at the time, when you're looking at your natal chart, it's fate, right? It's all pre-programmed. All of it predestined, worked out. Nothing you can do to really change it except learn to live with it. Why is it that way? What programmed it? Not the transcendent God, who's all about freedom. No, it's the God that's all about control. It's not really a God. It's an egregore. And so we use it when you hear people talk about religion and say, oh, religion is evil. Institutional religion, it's the worst thing that ever happened. It's all about control. They only want to control you. It's because they're not worshiping God. They're worshiping the demiurge, the egregore that was created by human consciousness out of our egos. And we do it to this day. And when you're not a religious person, what you do is you create egregores out of your politicians, and you make demiurges out of systems of control, and you create political systems that control you instead. It's all worldly systems, and God is calling us to transcend them all, to move beyond them entirely. And our prayers are going to that God, that transcendent God. Our prayers are not really going to this demiurge. Demiurge interferes. But it's just an egregore. We created him. Okay? We gave birth to him. He gave birth to our ego. It's kind of a mutual thing. And a bit paradoxical. But we won't worry about that. That's another metaphysical discussion altogether. So, when I'm talking to the cosmos, and I'm making ultimatums and saying, we either set this straight, or there's going to be hell to pay, and you know that I can make hell to pay for you, because there's not very few people that do what I do, and you don't want to lose me doing what I do, because I maintain the balance to make your life nice and easy, talking vernacular terms, then the end result is that it listens. And all the archetypes that make up this archonic reality that is constructed of human consciousness, and all of the conventions and illusions that we create out of our ecosystem and our identity of self, which incidentally does not exist, which is why reincarnation is not real. not real the way we think it is. Yeah, your energy goes on, and your concept of self might go on. So you might say, "Oh yeah, I was this person in another life." Well, it wasn't really you, and you're not really you. You're an illusion that you're a construct. Snap your fingers, you're gone. Blink of an eye. You want to become real? Then you got to become transcendent. So salvation is about conquering death. But what is death? Death is not just about the elimination of our of going to hell or becoming nothing. It's true life, transcendent life, and perfect freedom at the ultimate level of union with God. That is the true pleroma that the Gnostics were talking about. And guess what? That is all real. All right? Just because they threw some theology in there that the church found unpalatable and seemed to contradict with what they were teaching in proto-Orthodoxy doesn't negate the value psychologically and its contribution to philosophy and how it actually influenced Christianity to this day. So all of that is how we must look at this. And this is when I say, I'm going to smash that bottle of bourbon. It is absolutely smashing it in the face of that demiurge and saying, you no longer have control here. I've given you more than enough time to have your little temper tantrum. It's time to get back on track. All right? The demiurge is an ignorant child. It's again, it truly is just an egregore out of our own creation and built of our own ignorance. It's as if you took your ignorance, projected it out there, turned it into an all-powerful being, and now what do you have? You've got this bastardized God that's not really even God. But everybody thinks he's God, and they worship him as God, and they think they're doing what he wants. So the Joel Osteens of the world, prosperity gospel, of course the demiurge will be more than happy to give you prosperity, right? It'll make you at least believe that, because it's self-serving. It's all about ego gratification. Salvation's not about ego gratification. Salvation's about actually becoming a real person. You're not a real person yet. You're not real yet. You think you are. It's just your ego. It's illusions of your ego. You have to transcend to become real. You have to be willing to give it all up in order to gain it all. That's what Jesus was trying to say. Those who will lose their life will save it. Those who save their life will lose it. That's what he means by that. Right? So much to get into. So far beyond what I can even get into, to really even explain it all. We just barely scratched the surface tonight. But that is hopefully something that you will, give you food for thought and hopefully lead to a lot of questions. And we can actually ask, answer a lot of those questions that are asked here shortly. But I want to just say, because we're so close to the top of the hour, let's go ahead and break now. And then when we come back, we'll be taking your calls. The number to call again is 516-453-0138. Call now, get into the queue. We're taking your questions, comments, anything. Stories. We want to hear them. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of Vestiges After Dark. We've been talking about Gnosticism, Abraxas, astrology, and the God below God. We're getting ready now for open lines, taking your questions about anything. Doesn't have to be about tonight's topic, but if you have questions about tonight's topic, we'll be happy to answer those too. Sister Mary Joan is here, and she will be also answering your questions. So call in now. The number is 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. Call in now. Don't go away. Well, thank you, everyone, for staying through the break. I hope you enjoyed that new line of music. We've upgraded and updated a little bit there. It's nice for a nighttime talk show to get a little lively so that we don't fall asleep, That's what it's all about. Talk shows can make you very sleepy. It's known to happen. And people tell me my voice is meditative, so I don't know if that's true, but I can believe it's true because I used to hypnotize people in high school. I really did. I actually did presentations for class. Probably wasn't the best thing to do, but I did do it.
I totally picture this.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. I've always been a little.
Tell me some of your little stories as a young little prankster.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was actually a lot worse than I am today. If people think I'm bad now, I mean, they wouldn't have been able to handle me back then. We'll talk about some of those in future episodes. But I saw some interesting questions there in the chat room. One was saying that Heathcliff needs his own Twitter. I agree. I think maybe it's time that we set him up one. I'll work on that.
Oh Lord.
Yeah.
he'll outpace both of us.
Oh yeah, he'll have 100,000 followers within a year, and he'll have a verified account before any one of us ever gets one.
You know it.
Another person asked, I think it was Tiffany, I'm not really sure. How do we destroy
Tiffany GT33?
Okay, yeah. How do we destroy the demiurge? And it's a very easy thing to answer, but it's very difficult to do. You destroy the demiurge by destroying your own ignorance. This is why enlightenment is so important, because the demiurge is actually a projection of our mutual, combined, collective ignorance. So our stupidity is what creates this entire erroneous condition, including all the pain and suffering and everything else. You think it's about disease. You think it's about evil. It's about ignorance, all of it. In Buddhism, there's only one sin: ignorance. That's it.
Ignorance.
Yeah. It's the only sin. So you want to destroy the demiurge? Destroy your ignorance. But the problem is everyone needs to do it. Okay? So, and you can't use the excuse, well, I can't be the only one because no one else is going to do it, so what's the point? You can't think like that. You just have to work on you. You work on you. You do you. Okay? Cultivate constantly. And that will lead to the eventual demise of the demiurge. but that's the way. That's the way you do it. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. So, international callers, if you want to call in, we can try this tonight. It's at Eye of the Seer. So call Skype to Skype at Eye of the Seer. If you've got a question, comment, whatever, if you're international, only international people only, please, because I can only take one call at a time on that line, and I don't even know if it's going to work. So if it doesn't work, don't get mad at me, because I did try. But you can try it at Eye of the Seer. That's EYEOFSEER. I'm sorry, EYEOFTHESEER. Eye of the Seer. I'm sorry, I said Eye of Seer. No, it's Eye of the Seer. Okay, and give it a call, and we'll see if it works. But only international people, because that's like their reserve line. It's for them. And hopefully it'll work. I don't know. I'm calling in from Colorado. It's Joy Keeling on the line. How are you tonight, Joy?
I'm doing good, Bishop.
Well, it's great
Hey, Joy.
it's great to have you on. I hope that you call in from time to time with your ideas and contributions, because you always are thinking about these wild things. And I know you presented to me a question that is very interesting. It's something that I don't know if a lot of people have ever even really thought about or know about, but I'll let you present it, and then we'll discuss it. So go ahead.
Okay, well, as a few people may know, not everybody, but I used to be the co-host of Vestiges, but now I have my own goofy little podcast where I just dress up silly and sit on a throne and wear a tiara and talk about metaphysical topics. And one of the topics I came up with, I was asking everybody, all my listeners, to give me ideas, and they gave me ideas about Bigfoot, aliens, fairies, demons, and angels. And I was like, dude, all of these fit together. So I started telling the story about how they all kind of fit together in different ways, different directions of looking at them. And one of the ideas is that fairies are fallen angels.
Yeah.
And it kind of confused me a little, and I was, talking about it in my podcast, and in the process I kind of answered my own question, but then I also said that I wanted to run it by you because it's a great topic, especially with the stuff we've just been talking about. Because the way the legend goes, basically the angels, Satan, there was a big war in heaven, and Satan fell and took a third of the angels with him. And those angels, the ones that fell into hell, became demons. The ones that fell onto the earth became like goblins and imps and dwarves. And the ones that fell into the water became mermaids. And the ones that fell into the forest became like satyrs and wild men and elves and things like that. And so it got me to thinking about what we consider fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And this entire universe is fallen. We're in an entropic universe. Everything is decaying anyway. So just the fact that these beings are attached to these objects, whether they're living objects or if it's, just an element, then it makes sense that these were the things that fell, these elementals that fell. The ones that did not fall are still in the ectropic universe. They've never been divorced from God.
Right.
So that was kind of the line my mind took, was like, well, yeah, they're attached to these things, so they would live a lot longer. Like you see one great big giant tree in the woods, that's going to be a very special, very spiritual tree. And when it falls, another one will rise to take its place. But that's something that we frequently see in places all over the world, seeing these, things that stand out. There's something attached to it, and it may be benevolent, it may be malevolent. We don't know until we interact with it. But the thing is, it's still this thing that is in the entropic universe, so it is in a fallen state. So it just decays a little slower, I think, because it's attached to something alive. Whereas the hell ones, they're completely cut off.
Right. And I think you've just actually gotten to the heart of the answer to this question and how to really look at it, because we have to ask ourselves what would happen if a creature that is ectropic by nature which would by all definition mean they are immortal, because obviously ectropic, the opposite of entropic, would mean that instead of things going from states of order to increasing states of disorder and decay like it does in entropy, in ectropy things would be going from states of disorder to increasing states of order, which would mean that you're constantly regenerating into a state of perfection, which is essentially what the resurrection is, by the way. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But what would happen if you take a creature that is by its nature ectropic and put it into an entropic universe? Well, we've only known that to happen, at least in terms of Judeo-Christian theology, twice. One was the fallen angels, and one was Jesus. Okay, angels are ectropic by nature, and Jesus obviously is ectropic by nature. Angels are immortal by virtue of their nature. Jesus, by virtue of being God, is naturally immortal. Even God incarnate becomes immortal by his very nature. So, but here they are living in this universe, right? So there's two interesting things to consider about that. It's easy to classify it all as demons, because demons are sort of the easy scapegoat to portray, and I mean certainly in conventional Christian terms, they like to think in very black and white, very compartmentalized concepts and say, well, if it's not from God, it's from the devil. So it's either they're angels or the demons. There's nothing else, no ghosts, no other creatures, no other, mythical beasts. It's just what it's just the angels and demons. That's it. And I think some of this actually comes from puritanical thinking. So I think some of this idea that the fairies and other elemental creatures are really just demons is kind of a puritanical viewpoint, where, again, getting us back to this mindset in Christianity where it's either angels or demons, nothing else. So anything that's pretending to be something else is really just a demon pretending to, working to deceive you or whatever. That's one, conventional explanation. But let's think about it metaphysically for a moment and philosophically and say, what would happen? What happens when an ectropic creature enters entropy? Well, Jesus, interestingly enough, ascended to heaven. So he resurrected, died. So we know that he could die, but that by his nature could not stay dead. So rises, right, through the resurrection. Teaches us how to do the same thing ourselves so that we can escape entropy. But he didn't stick around. I mean, wouldn't it have been so much better from our limited vantage point to say, okay, so you're resurrected, now stick around. If it takes 2,000, 10,000 years to save everybody, it's going to be a lot easier with you here doing it with us than to put the apostles in charge who still don't really know what they're doing, and then to use apostolic succession down to people like me to try to keep it going. It would be a lot easier if Jesus just stayed and could always set the record straight, could always make everything right, and we'd get through this a lot faster. It sounds like a logical idea, but the fact of the matter is,
but he doesn't
But he
belong
can't do
here.
it.
he can't do.
He can't do it with a resurrected body.
You can't do it with a resurrected body.
Ectropic universe.
Right. Exactly. The ectropic nature of his body would requires him. He will always assume back to heaven, because heaven will always take him back. And so he can, in the power of God, bypass that for a period of time. But again, because of the nature of linear time and the conventions of society, of our entire social structure, which is built upon these metaphysical principles, he will always ascend. And that's why he ascended to heaven. And why, and isn't it interesting, the part of him that remains is the Eucharist, which is his body and blood, the instruments, the result of his death that saves us, not the resurrected completion. That's always in heaven. It is always the instrument of the cross that is the enduring part, because that's the entropic principle of his nature that can stay with us. And that's why the Eucharist is such an important part. Now, these are things, of course, that no bishop in no church is ever going to teach the people, because it's just too beyond. In fact, I would say it's probably beyond most of the clergy. Honestly, I've only been able to have discussions like this with monks and my students. That's about it. But outside of the monasteries, and we're talking contemplative monks. We're not talking monks that work in the world. They're not capable of really having these discussions because it goes beyond even them. But this is the way it works. This is the metaphysics of it. Okay, so this is why Jesus, so he would be assumed into heaven. So a perfect ectropic being in an entropic universe eventually gets reabsorbed back into heaven. So, that's just the way it works. As far as the fallen angels go, that would have to be where they have completely corrupted their nature. Now, Jesus did not corrupt his nature. We know that he was perfect. He stayed perfect. He was without sin. He was like us in all ways but sin, Scripture says. That's not so for the demons. That's not for the fallen angels. They lost that aspect of themselves, and therefore they are a being of ectropy, now in a state of decay, just like we are. That's why we are in a state of decay. But because we're corporeal, we deteriorate a lot quicker than a non-corporeal being like an angel. So the demons are dying. They're dying too. It's just their process is a lot slower than ours. Go ahead.
And I think what happened is maybe when they called them angels, when they called them fallen angels, they kind of lumped them into a category just like they do with demons. I think some of them were things like elementals. Yeah. That were just functioning to take care of the earth. And because they're still attached to the earth, they're, still sustained by the earth. But at the same time, the earth is in a state of entropy, and it's decaying. So they are decaying too.
There's also
so I think, some of them are fallen angels, but some of them are these other types of beings.
Well, and the legend supports what you just said, because there's other variations on the legend. There's actually 3 that I know of. One is that they were the ones that were in between. So like those that were completely fallen, those that were that fell during the war, they became demons. Those that stayed on God's side remained angels, and then those that were sort of left in between at that point when the war ended, they became sort of these elementals and fairies and things like that. That's one theory. The other one is that they're all demons, and that's again getting back into that puritanical black and white thinking that so many conventional Christians have. And even with ghosts, you can't talk about ghosts. Ghosts are just demons pretending to be people, and that we know that's not true, but they think it's true. Then there's a third one. And I find the third one very interesting, and I think you'll like this one too, is that the idea was that they didn't take sides. The ones that did not take a side became the elementals. But because they were no longer working under the will of God, even though they were not evil, even though they were not standing in opposition to the will of God, they weren't supporting the will of God, they were still cast out. But not into the depths of hell, but here on earth. And so they now live more of a natural existence as a non-corporeal being. That's another part of the legend.
And you know what that reminds me of?
What's that?
Go ahead, Sister Mary Joan.
They were the lukewarm ones, and God wants either hot or cold, not in between.
Yeah.
Where you're going with it?
Yeah. Book of Revelation right there.
So what I was thinking about is, how there's some places where just the place itself feels evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
like
ma'am.
There's something wrong that happened on this land. It was one of the things that when I was praying for y'all when y'all were in Biggs, I picked up on something is coming up from the land, and it was like some kind of elemental that had been tainted somehow, and that was one of the things that I picked up on, and that would fit in with this. These elementals, they're decaying as well. They're unraveling. And this is what's happening is we're getting these soft spots because of it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that is a very, very plausible explanation for a lot of this. I don't think there's any way to really know their origin, but it stands to reason that there's also a belief, incidentally, that elementals are without souls. That's a long-standing esoteric tradition, that elementals do not have souls. which would mean that they don't have, from our vantage point, from the esoteric vantage point, Judeo-Christian ideas of this are always going to be about like this eternal nature. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about souls in esotericism. In esotericism and in occultism, a soul is more about the ability to facilitate freedom and creation and being able to work and operate volitionally, and be able to create through that. Whereas elementals are completely instruments of the system in which they operate. And they're
pretty much just a function.
Yeah.
Just a function that functions.
Correct. Yeah. And so they lost that when the war in heaven, whatever that is. Of course, that's an ineffable thing. That's not a actual event. That's a metaphor for some.
The cosmic fracture.
The cosmic fracture.
There you go.
That's a very good way to put it. The cosmic fracture, when that occurred, okay, we call it the war in heaven. What resulted from that is they at that point, that decision, the only time they could make a decision, it has to be an eternal decision because they're existing outside of time. So any decision that's made will have always been made, will always be made. There's no reversing it. That's why the devil is irredeemable. That's why demons cannot be saved, because they are existing outside of time. So their decisions are forever and always. And so that decision to disobey God or to work against the will of God will immediately result in the nullification of their volitional privileges, which is very much by virtue of the freedom that ectropy provides. Because remember, ectropy means nothing without ultimate freedom. You could not exist in a state of perfection if you're not free. Freedom is a prerequisite requirement to perfection. Which is why our lives are miserable the more that we are no longer in control of them, which is why the ego works so hard to stay in control, because we need that for security and safety and to live what we consider to be a better life. And obviously people that are in control of their lives tend to be happier people than those that are having circumstances that are outside of their control constantly. And the same thing goes for these elemental creatures. So they're more like animals, just non-corporeal animals, but far more sophisticated. So think about it in, like, the animal kingdom has it too. So you have, like, whales are very intelligent, high up there. Elephants also very intelligent, high up there. But you obviously have lower animals that are not so great, like snakes and rodents. They're not
like this fuzzy gray kitty over here.
Oh, my great, the kitties. Kitties are pretty smart. They get that prefrontal cortex. But the thing is,
but not this one. He's dumb.
Oh, he's not that. He's dumb. I've known some dumb cats. We had a dumb cat once. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, they're not really living volitionally. They are more as instruments of the natural environment. And if you put them into nature, if domestication gives them freedom. What is domestication? It gives them a sense of self, because now they can live vicariously through you, where now they can do their own thing. They don't have to worry about their survival. They don't have to be out there doing what their nature tells them to do. They can just sit there and enjoy their life kind of like we do when things are going well. But, you take a domestic cat and you throw him out into the woods, he's going to go feral again eventually, or die. Either he goes feral or he dies. It won't be one or the other. And eventually they have to, they'll revert back to their instinctual nature to survive, usually, unless it's gone too far, where they, and sometimes they can get it back. Like, they'll always have a proclivity towards humans. But I remember I had a cat once that we took in and we cared for, and he lived with us. And then when we moved to Florida, we left him with my grandparents because my parents didn't want to take him. And he spent most of his time at that point alone and outside. And when I went back to visit, he was still there. He still ate there, but he was a completely different cat. Very wild, didn't like being picked up anymore. All the things that we used to do together when we had him, that had changed, and now he was living a very feral existence, and that's because his natural proclivities took over. So these fairies and these elemental creatures that make up the pantheon of these mystical creatures that we think are really just fairy tales, but they're actually there's an essential reality to them, are also just the non-corporeal versions of this. And some of them are hyper intelligent, like the jinn, and some of them are like mosquitoes. They're just like more like a pest that just spreads spiritual disease, which we would experience as a type of attachment. But that's probably the best we're going to get to explaining or answering that question, because ultimately there's really no way to know for sure if that's where they came from or how it happened. But it stands to reason that we know one thing that we do know from esoteric tradition is that elementals are primordial. They definitely predate us. And if the war in heaven, which caused the cosmic fracture in the first place, predates us, which we know it does from even the standpoint of the traditional theology and what it teaches, the Book of Enoch and all that stuff, then we know that their origin had to have some point before us. And it doesn't, Scripture doesn't really talk about creating these things. It's just the forces of nature, but these forces of nature are now sort of individualized, because now through a process of reverse individuation, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, the end result is now you have a creature that's supposed to be perfect, made to be perfect, created to be perfect, created to be eternal, and is now dying and decaying in entropy with the rest of us. And unlike us, because they have no soul, they cannot attain to salvation. They can't escape it like we can, which would make them, I would think, bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would think so.
Yeah.
And it sort of reminds me of the creation story behind the jinn.
Yes. Yeah. Why don't you talk about that if you don't mind, for people that might not be familiar with it.
Gosh. Well, there are several versions of it. Basically, the gist of it is that the jinn are they were made not long after humanity, or maybe side by side with humanity, and they're just as complex. But where we were made of the earth, they were made of smokeless fire.
Yep.
Yeah. And so they tend to live in the abandoned places and the in-between places, a lot like you would find fairies living in these spaces. And it's kind of the idea that this used to be a place where people were active and people were alive and people were thriving, and now there's nothing there, but there's still something going on. And that's what you go and investigate when you're doing an investigation at a location or something. Is you're investigating that area. It's basically the gym of that area. If you want to just translate it into that, you could call it Fae, you could call it whatever you want. There's, each culture has their own version of this.
And we also know that, that the original sin event, which again is a metaphor for these ineffable things, so I always want to preface that and make sure that people understand that when I talk about things like Adam and Eve, the Book of Genesis, original sin, the war in heaven, I'm not talking about literal events. I'm talking about the metaphorical, archetypal stories that help us to understand something that is beyond human comprehension, because these are spiritual events and spiritual realities that are completely beyond our ability to comprehend. So we use these metaphors to understand them. So original sin, we know, brought death into the world. That's where entropy originated, because even this universe as we live in was designed to be ectropic. It was never intended to decay. And we were created as part of that natural system. We also know that there are celestial forces, call them angels if you will, that govern the operations of creation. We know that from the choirs of angels. We know that the higher choirs, like the powers and dominions, they handle some of these higher functions of the cosmos, like holding, for example, the laws of physics in balance. Now, some of that's transcendent work, obviously, because the universe is ultimately just a bubble of entropy. There's also an alternative side to the same universe that is ectropic. And because it's connected through that, what we call it in esoteric mysticism, the primordial, black and white holes, But that's again beyond most of the audience's understanding, I think, because they haven't had that lesson. But when you think about the entropy, it's still connected, and so a lot of these forces could govern the entropic side of the universe from the ectropic side. But yet there are other parts that are intrinsic to the cohesion of holding the entropic side together as much as it possibly can. And those forces, the force of entropy would still affect them. How that works, we don't know, but maybe some of these very benevolent elementals, because we know in paranormal investigation, it's not always, elementals are not always bad. Sometimes we interact with very benevolent ones that are very helpful. I knew a few gnomes once that were very nice gnomes. It's a weird thing to say, but if you do this work long enough,
I know I've encountered stuff myself.
Yeah. And
I've
they
had
were
a whole crazy life. I tell my stories on my podcast too.
Well, why don't you tell my audience about your podcast so that they can find it?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I'm doing it on Blog Talk Radio and YouTube, just like you are, because I signed up on Blog Talk and realized, I made a whole podcast. Might as well run with it.
Yeah.
It's called Queen Huntress, The Magical Throne, and I'm on live on Sundays at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 6 p.m. Eastern. Just sitting on a throne talking about metaphysical stuff with a tiara on my head. I can.
It's very archetypal.
Why wouldn't you?
It's very archetypal.
You wear your crown, Queen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I love it.
In fact, this coming Sunday, I am interviewing Sister Maximilian, and I'm really excited about that. I'm calling it the Royal Tea Party. She's my first ever guest, and so we'll just sit around sipping tea and talking about who she is, what she does for the church, and maybe some fun stories about running around with you guys.
Great. No, that sounds like a fantastic thing. So definitely tune into that. And
there's definitely stories.
And I know that you post about it on the Nicoland Network. So perhaps the easiest way for everybody to always get the notifications is to be a part of that network, and then you can follow Joy there, and you'll never miss a show. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, Joy, thank you so much.
So
that was a very interesting, idea and question. It really definitely leaves much to the imagination as to how exactly it works metaphysically, and there's really not enough that's written about it. But I think we did a pretty good job, don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it. Call in anytime. I mean that sincerely.
Always good to look at different aspects and thoughts about it. I mean, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Exactly.
It really is.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. If you got a question or a comment or a story, just like Joy did, call 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. I have it on the screen now, so you have no excuse. You have the number. There's no excuse for not calling. And we're not going to bite your heads off. I mean, we're not. I mean, maybe a little bit sometimes, but not usually. I mean, come on. We're pretty nice people most of the time. Right, Sister Mary Jo?
Try to be.
We try to be.
Try to be.
I mean,
try to be better.
Yeah.
I try to be better every day.
We try, but, sometimes people, get under your skin. It's just the way that it is.
Story of my life. So, Bishop, am I correct in remembering that you did have a photo of a possible gnome in the background?
I did. I can. Let me see if I can find that.
Let me tell you, that was very compelling. I mean, it looked like you had a yard gnome.
It is. Well, basically, that's a true gnome. That was an actual gnome, and that was over on Kennesaw Mountain, many, many, many years ago when Sister Maximilian and I, Tracy, for those who know her in the secular, we're dating. This was before we were married. Let me see if I can dig it out here. I know it is. Give me just a second. I can probably put it up on on the screen here. I think I found it.
Yeah, I've always wanted to try and investigate the park up there at Kennesaw.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot of energy up that way.
Oh, you can feel it when you drive through. I definitely. The first time I came through to go to your in-laws' house, I went through that area and wasn't real sure where I was, but I could sure feel it.
Oh, yeah.
And then I saw the signs for it.
I mean, some of it is the war. Some of it is the residual energy
no
from
doubt.
the war. But a lot of it also is things of a just a general paranormal. I mean, it's just the activity is. I found it. Here it is. Okay, so let me.
Awesome.
Yeah, let me go ahead and put
Y'all
this.
ain't gonna believe this one.
Let me see if I can put it up on the screen for everybody here. Give me just a second to see if this will actually work for our audience. I need to do a image, and I got to find the image here so that I can actually put it in for everybody to see, assuming it actually will come out. There it is. Okay, so you should be able to see it now. So there is, that's Tracy and I. Our very young Tracy and I, many years ago. This is more than, I'd say about maybe 20 years ago. And you can see, I wish I had I took actually 3 pictures, okay? And I'd have to dig out the other ones because I only scanned this one. This was on actual 35 millimeter photography. So this was a 35 millimeter camera, actual film, and I set it up on a tripod to take our picture on our favorite rock, which is what this is. And as when you don't have a photographer there and you're doing like a timer, you always take several shots so that you can assure that you're going to get one that you really want to use. And so there was a before, a middle, and an after shot. I took 3 pictures. Okay, this is the middle one. All right. So what you're seeing here, and I can try to even expand it a little bit so that maybe you can even see it a little bit better. What you're seeing here, and of course, only the YouTube people are going to be able to see this. So if you're listening on the podcast, you might want to tune in, go back on the archive on YouTube and watch so you can see this picture. But the first picture was just us sitting on the rock. Okay, and there was nothing there between those 2 trees. The second picture had this white, which is this picture, has this white bright light in front in the foreground, and then you see the little gnome popping up there behind the rock, looking at us. And then in the third picture, there's no white streak at the bottom of the picture, and then it's no longer between the trees anymore. So it was very quick. And when you enlarge it, it's like very blurry, so it's moving very fast. But that is an elemental. That is of the earth element and what would be very characteristic of a gnome, which is where they get the idea. They look like they have a cloak on, almost like a Jedi, but they're little tiny creatures. But they have these little, they look like a cloak. It's not a cloak. It's just because they move so fast, they look blurry to us, and that's kind of how it appears. But it looks like a hooded creature. And that's one of them. And we caught that, like I said, 20 years ago on Kennesaw Mountain. And there you go. So that's what Sister Mary Joan was talking about.
That's a good one. It's almost like Yoda popped in to say
hey. It is. So no, they're real. Elementals are real. I mean, they're not demons. They can behave like demons because, you come across a malevolent one, and there are malevolent elementals. There are elementals that are very dangerous to come in contact with. Yeah, those are going to be bad news and will give you a lot of the same effects as a fallen angel would. But at the same time, there's also benevolent ones that are helpful, and that one was a good one. It scared the hell out of the people that I showed the picture to, though, because I didn't actually see it. I didn't know I developed it, and didn't even know that I caught that image. And I was showing pictures to some friends and of that trip to Kennesaw. And that's exactly what she said. She's like, "What is that?" I said, "What is what?" She says, "That between the trees." And she actually got She saw the before and after ones too, so she knew that it was only there for a split second, because that camera took like bing, bing, bing. It just took 3 shots, so it was only like literally popped up for like like less than a second, and the camera caught it. And that was at, I think I was at a shutter speed of either 500 or 1,000 of a second. So it really caught it.
Yeah, and that's what they are. They're blurs. I mean, I've been in the woods. You know, I do a lot of meditation in the woods, and I always do a little tobacco ceremony and bring things for the elementals, for the fae.
Yeah.
And have a little meditation session back there. And when you're back there long enough, and you start to meditate, that's when you start seeing the things out of your peripheral vision. The shadows moving to and fro between the trees, and you all think it's a squirrel or a bird, but I'll look and they'll be gone. There's nothing there. But you can if you get in tune enough, you can definitely see the movement.
Yeah.
But they'll never let you look at them head on.
No, you can, and that's why the camera was able to catch it, because it had a shutter speed that was so fast that I was able to capture it in a 500th of a second or a 1,000th of a second. Yeah. Basically, you can freeze time.
Some of the paranormal pictures were accidents.
Oh yeah, some of the best ones are definitely.
Very interesting. Mm-hmm.
Adria Taylor, what is the white on the bottom? Is that just from a finger? No, there's no finger, because there was no one there. I mean, that was a camera on a tripod that was set on a timer. So that white light at the bottom is part of the anomaly. So whatever effect that elemental had on that moment also was causing there to be a light anomaly somewhere, also that the camera detected. But it's not hunched over, it's not kneeling, it's standing. That's about the size of them. I've seen them before, but it's rare to catch one. You can have these experiences, honestly. You go into the woods, go into the deep forest late at night and stay there by yourself for several days. And believe me, the creatures of the forest, and I'm not talking animals, although they'll be there too, but the creatures of the forest, the non-corporeal creatures, will definitely make themselves known to you. No question about that. I've experienced.
Oh, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah. I've experienced it.
I have too.
Any other questions from the chat? There's no one in the queue right now. But did you see anything, sister, of interest?
I think you answered the one that I saw.
Does anyone in the chat room have any questions for us? You feel free. I'll take the first ones that come up. Just pop them in. And
I know Night 2422 was asking, not really a question, but kind of a thought, what you think of a servitor.
Well, a servitor is a kind of basically an intended thought form. It's like a thought form that you actually intend to create using occult processes, occult mechanics, high-level ceremonial magic. And you can even use low-level, low magic as well, to create a thought form that is projected out to actually do things for you. So it's like a tulpa, but this is one that you actually intend to make for a particular purpose. And as long as you feed it, it will continue to serve you. And yeah, I mean, that's a real thing. It does and happen. The danger in it, of course, is that it can turn on you. So a lot of your intent is a part of the equation. So if your intent is to create a servitor to harm someone, then this automatically has the capability of being able to harm you as well. If you create one that's there to give blessings, to create wealth or enhance, I guess a person's health, then typically speaking, servitors will serve you as long as they're being nourished, and when their nourishment source ends, they tend to dissipate. But if there's something that, if they were created with some hostile intention in mind, they can sometimes find new sources and come back after you. So not the best thing.
That sounds a lot like that Goazon you dealt with.
Yes, it was. Yeah, Goazon. Yeah, that Goazon. That was definitely a type of it. That's more of a tulpa, but it's the same kind of thing. A servitor, can pretty much be the same thing in that respect. So yeah, it is very much, and that. We had to take care of that one, didn't we?
Yeah, it definitely lashed out when it was not being fed. Of course, you didn't know this at the time.
No, I didn't. And I mean,
But,
honestly, I did not realize the extent of how. I mean, I thought, my goodness, it's a Buddhist, deity. We're not going to have to worry too much about this. And I was already. I mean, you even brought over that special alcohol, that Asian alcohol. We were going to actually give offerings to it and give it the opportunity to set it free. And then it started, smashing windows and killing cats.
started being
And
bad.
yeah, that was it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Drain my battery. Yep.
It did. Yeah. Yeah. And you saw it. You saw it walking around in a shadow form,
Yeah.
didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've spoke of it before. I went out to my, I was showing up for mass, and when I pulled up the driveway, it looked like somebody was walking to your trash can. I thought it was you, but I was like, well, the garage door's not open. So I thought it was very strange. And then when I drove home afterwards, after a 2-hour drive, I go inside, go back out to start up my truck, and the battery's dead, which we all know that shouldn't have been the case.
No.
And, of course, Toyota couldn't find anything wrong with it, but they replaced it.
But see, that was drawing energy. Probably It was probably drawing energy to go and kill the cat.
Probably.
I mean, that's the kind of how these things work and operate. And, they can draw energy from a human being, but if in lieu of being able to have access to one, particularly one that's warded and well protected, they will use artificial sources of energy like batteries or even technology. They can affect technology. And anyone who does paranormal research will tell you that, yes, ghosts and non-corporeal things absolutely affect technology.
Yeah,
Demons.
we had some good sake all ready for it, and I think we ended up drinking it ourselves later on.
We did.
And then you've got the picture. You got the picture of the anomaly that came out of the fire where you burnt it.
Yes, that was very interesting. Yeah, and it was
Max's
unfortunately
testimony,
it didn't do it justice, because what we saw in person, you could actually see an entity with flesh burning off of it. It really looked like as if we threw a carcass of something in there, and it was like you were watching the cremation of a carcass. It was like the bubbling effect.
Crazy.
Yeah. And we could not capture that on camera. All we could get was that screaming-looking face. But in person, it was much more.
That was enough.
It was enough. I think most people could see it. It was a very unpleasant entity. We that's why we no longer take cursed objects to my home. That was the one that ended it. So now it goes to storage.
Yeah, learned on that one.
Yeah, we did. We did. And it was really because at some point, because of where it was in the garage, I guess wind or something broke the salt circle and gave it access to leave the containment area, and that's when all the problems started. But goodness gracious, we've reached the end of the show.
Telling you, we need a 3-hour podcast.
Well, I mean, we can do up to 3 hours on Blog. Blog Talk gives us 3 hours, so we could increase this if we need to. We did 2.5 last week. But next week, we're going to do open lines again, probably a new topic. And that's a week from tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope that you join us. Sister Mary Joan, thank you. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Joy.
Bishop. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy Keeling. Remember, this show's yours, so call in. It makes it a much more interesting show. And if you've called in before, call in again. It's a discussion show, and it's about the Nicolaitan family. Until next time, this is Bishop Bryan Ouellette saying God bless, take care, treat each other kindly. Kindness is always superior to every other approach to life. We'll see you next time.
Ninety seconds. 60 seconds. 10 seconds.